RTX Remix can sometimes feel like science fiction, taking a classic game with rasterized graphics and pumping them up with ray tracing when a modding team puts in the time and effort to do so, and it looks incredible. And with the RTX Remix competition on ModDB heating up, I thought it would be a great time to highlight some of the incredible submissions that have been entered into the competition. Here I'll show work in progress RTX remixes that the communities are working on right now, and just how and why I think they are special by comparing them to the original games running largely on period correct hardware from their release dates. Now I of course cannot cover every entry here, and I'm just going to focus on those that appeal to me most. So let's get right into it. Black Mesa is a game that I gave a glowing review of in 2020 when it came out with its Zen chapter. It is a great recreation of Half-Life 1 in the source engine with many graphical modifications and gameplay enhancements that keep things fresh 20 plus years on from that original. It's like a remix before RTX Remix came out, improving the shading, model quality, and much more over that original game. So I was incredibly happy to see that there is an RTX Remix project for it, and specifically a demo of which covers the game's initial introduction chapter. Now, the original Black Mesa release, I would say, is still handsome with great art and attention to detail, but the source engine is of course archaic at this point with its DX9 baggage. The game has high-res textures that are consistent with the art direction, but the lighting and material quality is getting on in years and lets those assets down at times, especially in comparison to modern releases that use physically based rendering, let alone forms of ray tracing. While the game does use real-time lighting and shadows occasionally, there's still a lot of that old source look in there, so you'll find many objects and characters merely grounded to that environment with blob drop shadows. Such anachronisms make it easy to imagine how RTX Remix could help the situation here. Loading up the RTX Remix version without the context of side-by-side comparisons had me floored. The lighting and material work was just pristine and gorgeous. It looked incredible, and I was wondering, did they remake all the textures for this game? What's going on here? How does this look so seamless and right? Making the comparisons though, I could see what is happening. Side by side, you can see that an incredible amount of work has gone into this RTX Remix project. Just in the monorail car alone, you can see what this remaster of a remaster means. In the original game, the normal maps are used occasionally, but most of the surface detail is driven by static diffuse lighting and static diffuse texture detail. So metals barely look like metals often, and they have a very grainy appearance. With RTX Remix, the authors took some of those diffuse textures, it would appear as a basis, and then stripped them of the baked features and gave them entirely new materials to make them look like the metals that they're supposed to be. And they all have a fine, up-res layer of detail. Grime and scratches and more are reproduced there, but instead of being driven by static textures, the material makes them shine through due to Remix's path trace lighting. So the scratches and grime make themselves visible as they disrupt the reflections of the lights in the environment on the surface. Just going across any scene in the intro in this game chapter here shows this work applied to nearly every object, where its material has been updated and the general art design has been maintained, but without that detail being baked statically into the texture. Rather, the detail is procedurally brought out by the material and the lighting conditions. Just look at the metal on the floor here. It's incredible what work has been done to update the textures and materials here. Then you have the new aspects of the visuals due to the lighting properties of Remix. Source was never good at reflections and specular lighting, so it's largely missing in the original Black Mesa release. Baked lighting tends to be bad at that, so many areas look overly diffuse and coarse, even though we know things like linoleum tiles, ceramics, and metals should be reflecting the environment. Here, the new RTX Remix materials show off reflectivity in a big way, taking those bathroom sinks to a whole new level where it starts to almost look like offline CGI. That is, until you see that the geometry is mostly the same as before. It's just the materials, textures, and lighting that are different. Or what about these tiled floors in the locker room adjacent to the bathroom? You only get slight reflections with a misaligned cube map before, whereas the RTX Remixed version has reflections found on the surface with varying intensity. The big fluorescent tube lights make waxy streaks on the floor that are broken up by smudges and uneven areas. Once again, if you ignore the blocky nature of the original geometry, this almost looks like something coming out of offline rendering. While real bounce lighting, reflections, and materials are doing most of the heavy lifting here to transform Black Mesa into something that rivals modern AAA, there are some occasional enhanced geometry assets, like these wooden benches here. Yes, the textures and materials are on a whole other level, but you can see that the object has been rounded out in those places where it makes sense. The RTX Remix project at the moment is only in this game's opening chapter and definitely is still heavily work in progress, with me finding some visual bugs here and there and some crashes along the way, but the promise it shows, even at this nascent state, is incredible. And much like how playing Black Mesa in 2020 was like playing Half-Life as you remembered it in 1998, where its faithfulness and detail aligned with your rose-tinted imagination glasses of the past, this RTX remix of Black Mesa fulfills that same role in 2025. It's Half-Life, or Black Mesa as you remember it in your imagination, and it's filled with the details and craftsmanship that only devout fans could really realize. Truly, it's an incredible bit of work, and I hope we can see the full game fleshed out in this manner in the future. When Call of Duty 2 launched in 2005, I was personally most interested in its campaign, but its lasting legacy after release probably comes from its multiplayer. It introduced a number of classic modes that would become the series staples, and it was the first game to launch nearly simultaneously on console in the series, on the Xbox 360. So it was the starting point for many people's love affair with that 360 no-scope instant death carnage that is Call of Duty multiplayer. To make the video you see on screen here of the multiplayer component, I booted up a retro 2005 Windows XP machine equipped with an Athlon X2 3800 Plus and an ATI Radeon X1800 XT, and yep, the multiplayer is still alive and well in 2025. The original master server may no longer work, but darn it, the game's community is still there. And that is not the only constant since 2005. As you can see on screen, I still suck at this game, and the graphics are still the same ones you saw back then. Call of Duty 2 ran on a souped-up version of id Tech 3, which powered the original Call of Duty. There were some new things, of course. Normal maps were found across the entire environment, giving guns, helmets, and much more that distinctive mid-2000s metallic sheen. You also had more complete shadowing. That wasn't anything dramatic, but characters did cast perspective correct shadows in the direction of the baked lighting. That was fine looking for the day, but it's definitely of that era technology. So here is where RTX Remix comes in, and the developer Tadpole3159 has specifically looked to remaster the game on a realistic scope. The single player is far too diverse and huge to do by themselves, so they limited it to the multiplayer, and only one level of that multiplayer for now, Carrington. Side by side with the original running on that 2005 PC I mentioned, the differences are night and day. Not just because the RTX Remix version allows you to change the time of day to any you please, but also because nearly every single asset, texture, piece of geometry on this map has been remade and upraised to an incredible level of detail. Stony masoned walls have been remade with ultra high resolution displacement textures, giving them a craggy, centuries-worn appearance. Vegetation, vines, and ivy have been increased in their density and realism, going from 2D textures that lacked shadows to becoming 3D facets with translucency and pixel-perfect shadows from each and every leaf. Tank traps go from boxy-looking, strangely wet cubes to rounded concrete, just overflowing in variation and surface detail. Truly, almost every single asset you can see in this level has been touched up with new textures and model details that are gorgeous and faithful to the time period and the original art design of the map. But it doesn't stop there. Some extra visual elements have been added as well. New debris litters the ground in areas that were previously just flatly textured. Some decorative windows have been opened up, showcasing real-time path-traced reflections with believable glass materials, and spent shell casings have been added next to the various machine gun nests scattered throughout the map, where each shell is rounded with a highly reflective brass jacket material. The first time I saw these, I was just in love with how realistic they looked and just how much more they add to this level's war-torn appearance. Being RTX Remixed though, the lighting is the whole thing driving these new materials and models to look as good as they do. Woods now have subtle variations in their textures, giving polished and stained woods that slight sheen you can see from the path-chased reflections of the sky. Yeah, that's something you see often in real life, but games don't capture it really well too often. When you're indoors, you can often see the skylight bouncing off the wooden floor near doorway entrances, which gives off spectacular bluish highlights. The same applies to sunlight in a more obvious fashion even. Sunlight spilling indoors reflects around the interiors, catching highlights on anything more specular like wood or paint, and then diffusely bouncing around the duller walls that have been covered in complex patterns of wallpaper. Nearly any tiny detail you can imagine here has been flushed out with incredible fidelity in this remixed level by Tadpole3159, and it's amazing to look at, but at the same time kind of sad as it is limited in scope. There's so much rich detail here that you can imagine would be amazing if more of the game got the same treatment. At the moment, only one gun has been fully remastered, the Lee Enfield you're seeing on screen at the bottom here, which has been modeled and scanned in with the help of a real weapon from a museum. It looks incredible, but the other weaponry at the moment that you can equip is more plainly textured with just passing materials, like the M1 Garand here. Of course, these are understandable limits given how this is a largely one-person project. All in all, the Carrington remake for RTX Remix is gorgeous, faithful, and right up there with some of the best graphical presentations you can load up on a modern PC. And that's really impressive given how it is a one-person show, essentially running on id Tech 3 under the hood. Star Wars Republic Commando is a curious game. Going back to play the 2005 release of this game on a PC from the era shows me how the game is both great looking and mediocre looking at the same time for its release year. It was an extremely late to the party DX 8.1 Unreal Engine 2 release that came out at the same time for the original Xbox. So some stuff looks great and some stuff definitely doesn't. The full screen shader effects for bloom or low light helmet filters look awesome. And the game has an amazing strict adherence to its first person immersion, with cool and tight animation work when you interact with anything, and your helmet visor can get all dirty and covered in particles which are wiped away in a suitably Star Wars sci-fi kind of way. That stuff is great, but the Unreal Engine 2 vintage shows elsewhere. Lighting, shadows, geometry, and texture work is not exactly spectacular for the year of release, especially in light of the fact that the Xbox 360 was just around the corner later that year. These lackluster visual aspects in the game make it a perfect candidate for RTX Remix, and a modding team here have ambitious plans ahead of them. Asking them what they plan for the RTX final release, they want to replace and update every single model and texture from the game's Camino introduction through the playable areas on Geonosis. They have a lot of work ahead of them, and with many assets still needing replacement, but the pre-1.0 demo here gives us some hints at what that will mean in comparison to the original game. Side by side with that 2005 DX 8.1 original, the differences are stark. Your Delta team squad mates have been given updated models with all new PBR texture work. They frankly look incredible in comparison to the original, replete with wear and tear and a whole lot of refined geometric detail that just isn't there before. I particularly love how the emissive textures on them glow in the dark, lighting up their own armor and places nearby, which is only possible due to ray-traced direct lighting as found in Remix. Another thing that you may have noticed is that the gun and first-person arm models have been remodeled and textured. The Stormtrooper blaster here looks great, and once again shows similar amounts of wear and tear that we see on the original model, but now it's being driven by materials instead of static textures. so it's reflecting itself and the environment around you. It's great looking work, and we're going to be in for a treat when more of the textures in the environment are updated with similar treatment. Environments right now, though, are still work in progress, and there's a number of areas that are still using the original textures there. Likewise, the HUD and helmet have yet to be added in a finalized way, so we're seeing the original HUD here being stretched to the modern aspect ratio and resolution. Those are all aspects that are on a list of things to do. Generally though, this short and sweet demo shows great promise, and it is especially awesome looking when blaster fire is lighting up the dark caverns of Geonosis's underground. I look forward to seeing this one progress in time from its very early state. Loading up the original Need for Speed Underground on PC was quite the nostalgia trip. Between the cheesy intro videos and hilariously chosen menu music and the forced low screen resolution, it just screams middle of the road early 2000s PC port. The game on PC is kind of a mixed bag, honestly. Menus max out at 800 by 600, and the game itself doesn't seem to support anti-aliasing, giving the in-game graphics a jaggy look even when trying to enforce it in the driver on a Radeon 9800 XT. You just can't seem to fix it with period correct hardware. In terms of graphical quality though, this EA classic stands out in some interesting ways. Reflections and post effects are everywhere, and nearly the entire racing track is reflected in the game's abundant rain puddles via planar reflections, sometimes with simplified geometry and textures, but it's convincing for the late 2003 vintage. Cars themselves also have reflection maps that update 1-to-1 with the frame rate, looking smooth and giving cars a video gamey but nice shiny look. And lastly, we have the post effects. Maybe not as nice as the ones found in the PS2 version, but the game has a lot of coronas, lens flares, and more to heighten the cinematic mood. It's not a bad looking game for the time period, but I can definitely imagine how modders would remix this one. Now, side by side with the original, the RTX mod shows off some fantastic differences, as one might imagine. The first thing I noticed was how much higher contrast the presentation is with the RTX Remixed mod. Lighting in the city is mainly coming from reflections and smaller area light sources. So the game looks a lot punchier, with less light leak covering every object like you can see in the original on the left. You can also see how the game actually now has shadows, unlike before. So the car will cast a shadow as well as anything near or under a light, such as the headlights of a car. Textures are also radically different, upscaled or wholly exchanged in many places, with ones that offer a bit more surface variation. The road texture in particular is now no longer so comic book shiny. Rather, it just has hints of reflections for the brightest lights and surfaces. One of my favorite details is just how much better the car looks with RTX Remix on, with new materials and proper reflections. Keep in mind here, between the left and the right image here, we're still seeing the same model in terms of the poly count, but it looks a lot more lifelike now due to the lighting on its surface. Another detail I like is the heavy reliance on emissive lighting filling out the game's backdrop. Neon lights can glow red, green, or blue and light up their surroundings, and tiny lit windows in the background light up the facades nearby. And all this is reflected in a pin-sharp manner on the glass or hood of your car. It's great work, and the modders have done a lot here to transform this game to look more modern. Though I must admit, some things are just different looking. Post-processing, for example, doesn't have those 2D lens flares and coronas, so that can take away from the game's directed art style. I'm not sure though if Remix at the moment has some way to do this procedurally to compensate for it. And lastly, even though the game does look much better in terms of shadowing and materials, it can tone down that hyper comic book look that you can see in the original. And at times, some cars can look less flattering when they are lit in a more diffused manner. Still, it's hard to complain given how this is an utterly optional mod. In motion, this game had the greatest challenge with Remix in comparison to all the other titles I tested. The original game holds up actually better in motion than it does in stills, as you're not bothered by the game's graphical shortcomings as the car speed makes them irrelevant as you race on by. The Remix, on the other hand, suffers in moments where the original excels. The high speed of the car causes aspects of the rendering to break down. It looks fine, of course, but you could often see the boiling of light where the denoiser or light sampling cannot keep up with the speed. It's dark, fast, and with tons of tiny emissive surfaces, so everything must be pretty noisy pre-denoising. Either way, it still looks pretty good in motion, but you can definitely see the shortcomings in comparison to other projects. Still, I definitely recommend giving it a try to check out path-traced Turn of the Millennium cars and some truly awful music. Coming to the end of this video, I wish I could have covered some more projects, but I'm just one person. The RTX Remix competition though is still on and has yet to be decided as of this video's production, so definitely give the ones that interest you a download and vote while you can. All I can say here is that I've been incredibly impressed with what I've seen and tested. The dedication I've seen is immense, and the modders and people here have taken a path tracing tool to produce some very special artwork. I look forward to seeing how all the projects evolve in the future. And until then, I hope you enjoyed this showcase video. Like, subscribe, hit the bell, help out on Patreon, follow on Blue Sky. As always, this is Alex, bidding you farewell und auf Wiedersehen.